Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing great. Hope you're having a nice week this week and that things are going well. Hopefully, you're not getting too hot because it's pretty warm outside. So, as you know, if you've been watching any of our videos, since we've started these, since Easter, we've just been going in order. What the events that took place after Jesus was crucified, after he rose from the grave and went back to heaven. So we started at Easter. We talked about what that was, what it meant, why it was important, why we celebrate Easter, and we've just gone on from there. So we're all the way into the book of Acts, chapter 16 now. We've done quite a bit of chapters and stories and information. And so here we are. Now, I want to kind of go back over something. Sometimes when we look at this, it feels like it can be, one day they did this, and the next day they did this, and the next day they did that. And it's not necessarily the case. So we're 16 chapters into the book of Acts, and we're several years past when Jesus has went back to heaven. Probably getting into maybe 4, 5, 6, something like that. Past then. So, and it could be longer than that. I don't know for sure. So when we tell these stories and we read them, it's not a day after day after day timeline. These are just kind of the highlights and the big stories and the turning points and the things that the writers felt like were important for us to know. So we've been reading about Paul in the book of Acts. In chapter 15, we read about how Paul and his traveling partner, his friend Barnabas, disagreed on something, and they decided it's better to go their separate ways and to not travel together anymore because they disagreed so strongly. But before that, in Acts chapter 15, there was a discussion, and last week we talked about how Jewish people have Jewish customs and their old traditional customs, and there are a lot of non-Jewish people coming to follow Jesus. And so the traditional Jewish people were trying to make the non-Jewish people follow Jewish customs when basically when Jesus came, he eliminated the need to do that. And so there was it's called a council. There was a meeting that discussed that, and so they sent out this information with all the disciples to carry around to all the churches, telling them, you don't have to worry about following these Jewish customs. Just don't do these certain things. A couple of those things were, don't eat food sacrificed to other gods. So during this time, people believed in all kinds of different stuff. They believed there was a God for everything, not just one God, which is what we believe. We believe in God in heaven, who's the creator of all things and God over all things. They believed in multiple gods. So they might believe that there was a sun god, and there was a water god, and there was a god of love, and a god of health, and all this kind of stuff. And so part of that was making sacrifices to them. And so one of the rules was, don't eat food that was meant for worship of other gods. Stay away from that. In fact, don't be around that kind of stuff at all. You need to worship God and follow him. So that brings us to chapter 16. So after Paul and Barnabas disagreed, Paul picks a man named Silas to travel with him. And So they set out and are going. They start out to go check on the churches that Paul and Barnabas had started before. While they're out traveling, it says they pick up another follower, a man named Timothy. Timothy is an important name because if we go a little deeper into the New Testament, there are two books, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. This is that guy. He's a young man when he starts following Paul and Silas, or going with Paul. It talks about how Timothy is a young man, but a believer and a man of great faith, and because of his family legacy, his family believed and followed. So we're starting to now see kind of the second generation of believers. Timothy's family believed and followed God, and so Timothy did too. And so he's an important figure. He's someone who becomes a leader in the church, and this is where we're first introduced to him, and he follows Paul around and is part of his company. So Paul and Silas sat out. They go out to check on the other churches, preach the gospel. It says to strengthen other believers in other places. Also to take the message from chapter 15, the that the council set forth, the kind of the, hey, these are the guidelines. They're spreading that around to everybody who believes already. And it says that one night, well, they're traveling, and Paul wants to go to a place in the province of Asia, which, Asia is still a place today. It's one of the biggest continents in the world. And so Paul is trying to go into Asia to spread the gospel. But it says that the Lord would not let them go into Asia. He stopped them from going. They were not able to cross the borders, even though that they wanted to. So up until this point, we know that Paul is following the Lord, but it seemed like the Lord kind of let him go wherever they went. But now we're seeing where he's being blocked. He can't go. We don't know if it's a protection from something in Asia or if it's because the Lord has other plans. And so he's wanting to go and he can't go, and so they just kind of keep going in the route that they were going. And then it says Paul one night has a vision or a dream. And it says that there's a man from Macedonia. Now, you don't know where Macedonia is. I don't either. I could look at a map and find it. But it's just another place. Okay? And there's a man from Macedonia in Paul's vision. And he's standing there and he says, hey, come over and help us. So, that's the vision. That's what we're told. Paul wakes up and it says at once, immediately, they get up and go to Macedonia because Paul felt like that was a vision from the Lord telling them to go. So they go. They don't have any trouble getting there. It talks about kind of their route. That's important because we got to know everywhere Paul goes, he's preaching the word. And so there may be places that he's already been. And when there's places he's already been, then there's other believers there and people that they stay with, friends that help them travel. If it's places that they have not been, then they're preaching the word and they're spreading the gospel and they're converting people as they go, everywhere they go. So this journey to Macedonia, it is that. They're either checking in on people or converting new people as they go. So when they get to Macedonia, same story as other places that they've been. They're preaching, they're teaching, people are turning and converting, people are following them around, spreading the gospel, being saved, it's wonderful. And then we hear about this one story, and it's kind of a strange story. So as they're traveling around in Macedonia, there's a slave girl, it says, who has a spirit. And her spirit gives her the ability to tell the future. And because of this, she's a slave girl. That means that she's owned by someone else. And just a little side note, I know when that word slave comes up, we think about American slavery of people of color or whatever. But during this time, there were a lot of slaves, and they were all different kinds of people. So don't get that image in your head of American slavery. She could have been anybody. People were so poor back then that they a lot of times sold their children into slavery so they would have money to survive. It's really terrible. So this slave girl is owned by other people, and she has a spirit that allows her to tell the future. And so her owners make money off of her telling the future. Let's just say, for example, she has a little roadside stand or a little shop or a place, and people come and pay her or pay her owners to tell the future. So it doesn't say that Paul is teaching to her. It says that when she sees Paul and Silas, she starts shouting. Let me see. She starts shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." Now, that is correct. That's good information. Paul and Silas and all their followers are servants of the Most High God, and they're telling people the way to be saved. There's nothing wrong with what she said. But then it says that she kept this up for many days, following them around everywhere they went, shouting this over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's all she did. Follow them around and shouted this. Now, even though she's telling the truth, and even though, because she might have been popular, people might have knew who she was because she was a fortune teller, like, people might have been listening to her. And then listening to Paul and Silas. Well, whatever the case, Paul became annoyed with this little girl. And so finally, after days of this, he turns around and he says, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." And at that moment, the spirit left her. So he cast out an evil spirit. Again, nothing bad about that. But remember, this little girl or this girl is owned by other people, and they use her fortune telling, her telling the future to make money. And it says that she made them a lot of money. So now their way of making money has gone away. A lot of money. So they get really angry. They were making money without having to do anything, and they were making a lot of money, and now that's taken away, and they get really angry. Excuse me. So it says at once they realized their way of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas, dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before a council or a trial, said these men are causing an uproar and blah, blah, blah. Just made up something because, again, their way of life had been affected. The crowd joined in the attack, and then it says they stripped them and beat them. And after they had been severely flogged, which is a type of beating where it would have been very, very, very painful and brutal, then they're put in jail, and they're told... the jailer is told to guard them carefully. So upon receiving such orders, he puts them in the inner cell and fastens their feet in the stocks. So, they're doing good. There's no opposition. All of a sudden, after many days, they start facing immediate opposition. These people rile up the crowd. They're stripped down, beaten severely, put in jail, and they're told that, so they're put in the inner cell. That means that they're in the middle. There's no way they could escape, and their feet are fastened in the stocks. Now, when I think about that, I've seen pictures of the stocks. Stocks are where, someone is, there's a thing and you put your head and your hands in there and they close it down and you can't move. Or it could be chained to the wall. But either way, their feet are in it and so they can't move. They can't go anywhere. So it says, after all that happened, about midnight that night, after having been beaten severely and put in jail for doing nothing wrong, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Imagine being in that situation, having had all of that happen. Okay, we're not talking about a whooping or a spanking or something like that. We're talking about they were beaten with rods. They may be bloody, they may be cut up, they're definitely bruised all over. And here they are praying and singing to God. So it says there's a violent earthquake, so violent that the prison foundations are shaken, and all at once all the prison doors open up and all their chains fall off in the whole prison. While they're in prison and they're singing and praying, they're witnessing to the other prisoners. It says that the other prisoners are listening to them. And so there's this earthquake, doors open, chains fall off. It could be, hey, we're free to go. I mean, clearly that was a thing from the Lord. So the prison guard comes in, sees that the doors are open and the chains are gone, and he takes out his sword and gets ready to kill himself because he thinks that all the prisoners have escaped. When all of a sudden Paul yells out, "Don't harm yourself. We're here." At that moment, the guard calls for lights to come in, and he sees that everybody's there and in place and that they're where they're supposed to be. He takes Paul and Silas out. He cleans them up. He feeds them. He takes them to his house. He asks, "What do we need to do to be saved?" They say, "You need to believe in Jesus and follow him." His whole family is baptized immediately. He listens to them all night. They're preaching and teaching. Whole family is saved. The next morning, this is good. The next morning, the people who put them in jail come to the guy and say, "Hey, you need to release them and then send them out of town. Don't let them stay." And he tells Paul this, and Paul says, "Nope, that's not happening." Because they're in Roman city. And Paul is a Roman citizen. And kind of like in America, Roman citizens have special privileges in Roman cities. And so Paul says, we were arrested and beaten without a trial, and we're Roman citizens. They can come tell us themselves. And so when these officials heard that Paul was a Roman citizen, they were alarmed. They're like, "Oh no, we could get in big trouble because we did this." So they come and nicely escort them out of the city and talk to them and appease them. And it doesn't say what that means, but they do something to kind of make it a little bit okay. So in this story, I know I'm running long, I gotta hurry up. There's a lot that happened. Paul and Silas and Timothy and all the followers, they're following the Lord. They're listening to Him. When they're making conversions, they're leading people to Christ. Their whole families are being saved. They're in this place, and there's a huge impact being had. When they face opposition, not only do they keep going, but while they're in the middle of this opposition, they're singing and praying to God, still converting people, even in prison, even in jail. This is a great example of how we should do. Now, we're not in jail because we're following Christ. Hopefully none of us are in jail. But sometimes we face hard times. Sometimes we face, pressure to stop doing the right thing. No matter what's going on in our lives, we should always be doing the right thing and following God and telling others about Him. Alright, I know I went a little long this week. I hope you have a great week. Hope everything's going well, and I'll see you on the next video.